This is a Note to Future Me, May 7th, 2018. Well, it takes a lot of investment to get your podcast off the ground. If you have even 5 episodes up or 50, you know that. And coming up with content, recording, editing, and then publishing, not to mention buying all the equipment, paying for hosting, and trying to promote it. Well, it also doesn't help that most of us podcasters don't know how to self-promote. Not to worry, though. I think this list is going to help you out. I've got 7 ways that my podcast clients have used to successfully help promote themselves. Number 1, and this is going to be something you've heard over and over and again, but I think it's well worth addressing. Be consistent. If you want your listenership to consistently grow, you need to consistently deliver. This means drop an episode on the same day every week. You, in essence, have a contract, quote unquote, with your listeners that you will produce, record, and publish your invaluable content. And I don't mean that facetiously. They've subscribed and listened to you religiously because your content is valuable to them. And it could be that it's just you've lightened up their Monday morning if that's when you publish, or the content that you have has made their life better. But it's a tacit type of podcast agreement that you will deliver upon that schedule that you've set up. Now, if your listeners tune in on their Monday commute and you fail to deliver, they'll find something else to listen to. And then you have to work twice as hard to earn them back. So better not lose them in the first place. Number 2, share where people care. Now, sharing your podcast to your social media, of course, it's a no-brainer. That's where your friends, family, and fans are. They care about what you're doing, and it makes sense to share with them. But is it enough to reach a wider audience? No. So where else should you share your podcast? That's the tough part. That is where the self-promote comes in and figuring it out. So where people who might care about what you have put out there, that's where you need to go. So seek out forums, blogs, Facebook groups dedicated to what your podcast is all about. Join the groups, start being a part of the conversation. Once you've become a part of the community, let them know you have a podcast that they might enjoy. Invite them to check it out. You have to give enough in advance to the group so your contributions or recommendations of your podcast episodes don't come off as shameless self-promotion. So be in that community a while. And I don't know how long that is, but enough that a lot of it hinges on how active that community is. Get a gauge of how the other members promote themselves, because they're in it for themselves as well, to learn and to be part of a safe group. So be protective of that group, and they will reward you. Mail your list every week. That's number 3. If your podcast doesn't have a mailing list, get one started. Invite your listeners to sign up for your newsletter. Send them a reminder every time a new episode drops. Well, if you're like me, they probably subscribe to a lot of different podcasts. New episodes get lost in my mix. I get probably 10 to 12 new podcasts added to my playlist every morning. Yeah, I'm a heavy user. And one of them is likely to get passed on, but the topics will draw me in if I see that email reminder. So if you have an email list, inform them of every episode the day it drops. Number 4, invite the right guests onto your podcast. If you are guest-driven, you know that podcasting is the new media. Invite people who your listeners would want to hear from to be a guest on your podcast. You might be surprised who will say yes. Having big names in your niche will definitely bring in new listeners, so don't let your fear of rejection keep you from inviting them on. Use it and watch your network start to grow. Number 5, get yourself booked on as a guest on other podcasts as well. So the reverse is true. This is probably the best way to get new listeners. Whether you have a guest-driven podcast yourself, your content is valuable to somebody. It's also the hardest to pull off, okay? Keep this in mind. Like you, other podcasters need guests for their shows as well. The easiest way to reach out to them is through social media or email. But just like when reaching out to a potential guest, your email or private message needs to be personalized. You know those spam messages you get. Do not copy and paste a generic message to other podcasters, asking them if you can come and pitch yourself to their listeners. Just like you, they're going to refuse you. So be treated like you want to be treated. Instead, pick out some podcasts that you know you'd be a good fit for. You can find those, of course, by searching iTunes for the category or even just a Google search and include the term podcast with it. Remember, podcasts with the most ratings and reviews also have the most engaged audiences, so pick a handful and then download them and listen to at least 3 or 4 episodes of each of those podcasts you picked out. It's going to give you a good idea what their show's like, what you could add to their podcast as well as far as value goes, and if they even do interviews too. Okay, you may see somebody with the topic you want to be on, and they don't interview anyone, and you're going to look like a fool contacting them to see if you can be a guest. So make sure that they are guest driven. Once you're sure you're a good fit for their show, go ahead and reach out to them. Tell them how much you like their podcast. Make mention of something only a true listener would know about. That's going to give the social proof, the listener proof that you have done your homework. Go ahead and rate and review the podcast. If the podcast is that good that you want to be a part of, you should do that for them. Like and follow them on social media. And then introduce yourself. Ask them if they'd be down to have you as a guest on their show. Make your pitch in terms of why it would benefit their listeners, and you'll face a lot, at least as not as much resistance. I mean, it depends on their guest load and such. You can say like, I'd love to teach your audience about, or since I'm already a listener, I'm betting your listeners would love to hear us talk about. Open phrases like that. Ask them to come on your show as well in exchange. That way they can cross-promote each other, the podcasts. This type of arrangement almost always works out great for both parties involved. Number 6, don't forget your call to action. At the end of every episode, include a call to action. You just poured your blood, sweat, and tears in providing something of value. It's not unfair for you to ask for a little something in return. In fact, they will want to know what you want them to do next. So ask. Ask them to subscribe in iTunes. Ask them to rate and review the show. Ask them to join your newsletter. Ask them to share the show with someone they know who would enjoy it. Never, ever end an episode without asking your listener to do something that will help grow the size of your audience. But don't go overboard as well, too. Again, we can't do more than one thing and remember one thing at a time. So don't ask them to do all the things I just mentioned. Pick one. In fact, prioritize. What do you want to build up first? What's most important to you at that point in time? If it's building up that email newsletter, ask them to subscribe to the newsletter and give them the reason why they should subscribe rather than just a reminder. Hey, I can send out reminders of my new podcast. Give them something that that a regular listener is not going to get. Just insider information about what the interview is about, little teasers, lots of different things you can do to make it worth their while. But just one piece of call to action. And the last, number 7, patience and dedication. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to take time. Most podcasters give up before they even have had a chance to succeed. It's the biggest reason many of them fail because they didn't give it time to take root. Most successful podcasts don't see the cumulative growth until second year, really. Depending on your podcast schedule, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, the more often you publish, the quicker it will build, but you really are not going to see anything until year number 1. You're going to have a better podcast after year number 1. You're going to build up everything over those first 12 months. If you show up and do the things listed, your podcast is going to have a steady growth. If you have patience, let your podcast take its course, you're going to hit a stride. There's no saying what one thing's going to work best for you, but when it happens, you're going to know it. One day you're going to check the downloads and boom, it's going to go, where did this happen? And when it happens, it starts to snowball. So you got to be ready. Well, here's my call to action. Head over to circle270media.com. I'd love to have you as a subscriber to my Open the Mic newsletter. It's a daily newsletter themed between sales ideas, social media ideas, podcasts of the week, podcast news. Love to have you as a subscriber. It's a very quick read, 2 to 3 links to read and delivered right at noon every day, Monday through Friday. So you've got a little bit of time over lunchtime to click through, read the articles, and learn and to be a better podcaster. Again, it's at circle270media.com. Thanks for taking notes with me.